I never expected that a simple haircut would change my life. But that's exactly what happened when I walked into a barber shop I'd been avoiding and sat down in a chair I never thought I'd be in. It's funny how the biggest shifts in our lives are rarely announced with trumpets and fanfare. They sneak in through the side door, disguised as mundane errands or unavoidable chores. My life-altering moment smelled like talcum powder and leather, and it started with the low hum of a pair of clippers. Let me take you back. My name is Miles, and before all this, my life ran on a schedule so predictable you could set a clock by it. I worked from home as a software developer, a job that suited my quiet, introspective nature. My world was largely confined to the four walls of my apartment, the glowing rectangles of my monitors, and the occasional, carefully planned trip to the grocery store. It wasn't a bad life, just a very small one, cushioned by routine and a familiar, low-grade loneliness I had long since accepted as a permanent roommate. Part of that routine was my monthly visit to the Corner Cut, a classic, no-frills barbershop run by a man named Arthur. Arthur was in his late 60s, with hands that shook slightly but still wielded a pair of scissors with practiced ease. Our interactions were a comfortable ballet of unspoken understanding. I'd sit down, he'd nod, and for 20 minutes, the only sounds would be the snip of his shears and the creak of the old leather chair. I liked it that way. It was safe, predictable. But then, Arthur retired. He sold the shop, and a handwritten sign taped to the window announced his departure and wished everyone well. For 2 months, I let my hair grow out, feeling an absurd sense of betrayal and paralysis. The thought of finding a new barber, of having to explain to a stranger how I liked my hair, filled me with a disproportionate amount of dread. It was just a haircut, right? But to me, it felt like a significant breach of my carefully constructed comfort zone. The shop reopened under a new name, Forge and Shears. The old, faded decor was replaced with dark wood, exposed brick, and industrial light fixtures. It looked less like a neighborhood barbershop and more like a trendy, downtown establishment that had gotten lost. And with the new look came new barbers. There were 3 of them, all younger, covered in tattoos, and possessing a kind of effortless cool that I could only ever observe from a distance. One of them in particular caught my eye. His name was Caleb. I only knew that because I'd heard one of the other barbers shout it across the room one afternoon as I walked by on the other side of the street. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his t-shirts and dark, thick hair that he kept perfectly styled. He moved with a confident, easy grace, laughing with his clients as if he'd known them for years. He was, in a word, intimidating. He was also, to my quietly observant eyes, beautiful. From the safety of my apartment window, which overlooked the street, I'd sometimes see him at the end of the day, sweeping the floor of the shop or leaning against the doorframe, smoking a cigarette. He seemed to belong to a world entirely different from my own, a world of loud laughter, easy camaraderie, and casual, physical confidence. I categorized him immediately in that mental file I kept for people who were utterly and completely unattainable. He was the kind of guy I assumed dated models or bartenders, the kind of guy who wouldn't even register a person like me. So I watched from afar and let my hair get even longer. Life has a way of forcing your hand, though. I got an email from my company announcing a mandatory, in-person team-building retreat in 2 weeks. It was the first one since the pandemic, and my immediate reaction was a wave of social anxiety. My second, more practical reaction was a panicked glance in the mirror. My hair had officially crossed the line from in need of a trim to verging on unkempt. I looked like a man who hadn't left his apartment in months, which was uncomfortably close to the truth. I couldn't show up looking like this. I had to go to Forge and Shears. I had to face the music. And I had to hope, with a desperation that felt silly, that I wouldn't end up in Caleb's chair. The day I finally worked up the nerve to go, a cold, persistent drizzle was falling, slicking the sidewalks and casting a gray pall over the city. It felt appropriate, a perfect match for the nervous flutter in my stomach. I stood outside the shop for a full minute, watching the rain bead on the large front window, before taking a deep breath and pushing the heavy wooden door open. A little bell chimed overhead, announcing my arrival like a death knell. The shop was warm and smelled amazing, a mix of something clean and woodsy, like sandalwood and cedar. Music played from a speaker in the corner, some indie band I didn't recognize but liked immediately. 2 of the 3 chairs were occupied, And the only one that was free, of course, was Caleb's. He was just finishing wiping down his station, his back to me. When he turned around, a small, welcoming smile touched his lips. It made my stomach do a nervous little flip. "Hey man, welcome. Just looking for a cut?" he asked, his voice a little deeper than I had imagined. It was smooth and easy, with no trace of judgment for the shaggy mess on my head. I just nodded, my own voice apparently having decided to take a vacation. I felt like a teenager with a crush, awkward and overly aware of my own hands. He gestured toward his chair. "Have a seat. I'm Caleb. Miles." I managed to get out, my voice sounding tight. I slid into the chair, the leather cool against my back. He draped the black cape over me, his knuckles brushing against the side of my neck for a fraction of a second. The contact was nothing, a completely incidental part of the process, but it sent a jolt straight through me. I stared at my own reflection in the giant mirror, my face looking pale and anxious under the warm lights. "So, Miles," he said, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror. He had kind eyes, I noticed. They were a warm hazel, crinkled slightly at the corners. "What are we thinking today? Just a trim, or are you looking to make a big change?" He ran his fingers through my overgrown hair, assessing the situation. His touch was professional, detached, yet it felt incredibly personal. I could feel the warmth of his hand through my hair, and I had to actively fight the urge to close my eyes. This was the moment of truth, the dreaded conversation. I had rehearsed it in my head. Just a trim, I guess." I began, my explanation tumbling out in a nervous rush. "I have this work thing coming up, a retreat, and I just need to look, professional, presentable. Not like I've been living in a cave." I cringed inwardly at my own awkwardness. He chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. It wasn't mocking at all, it was friendly. "Don't worry, man, I get it. A lot of guys are coming out of hibernation these days. We can definitely get you cleaned up and looking sharp for your retreat. I'll just take a little off the top to add some shape back into it, clean up the sides. How does that sound?" He was making it so easy. All my carefully manufactured anxiety began to recede, replaced by a tentative sense of relief. "Yeah," I said, my voice a little more stable this time. "That sounds perfect. Thank you." He nodded, picked up a spray bottle, and spritzed my hair with warm water. The scent of it filled the air around me. Then he picked up his comb and scissors, and the familiar, comforting snip-snip sound began. For a while, we didn't speak. I watched his hands in the mirror. They were strong and steady, with clean, short fingernails and a constellation of faint scars and calluses on the knuckles. A silver ring, simple and unadorned, was on his right thumb. His movements were precise and economical, yet fluid. There was an artistry to it that I hadn't seen with Arthur. He wasn't just cutting hair. He was shaping it, considering every angle, every strand. He was completely absorbed in his work, his brow furrowed in concentration. It was strangely captivating to watch. This person I had built up in my head as some kind of unapproachable, too cool for school guy was actually a craftsman, deeply focused and dedicated to his trade. The initial silence wasn't awkward like I feared it would be. It was comfortable, filled only by the sounds of the shop and the rhythmic snipping of the scissors. I found myself starting to relax, my shoulders unclenching from their position up by my ears. After a few minutes, he spoke again, his tone casual. "So, software developer, huh? That's cool. Do you enjoy it?" I was surprised he remembered that detail from my rambling introduction. "Oh, yeah. Most of the time," I replied, my eyes still fixed on his reflection. "It's a lot of problem solving, which I like. It can be a bit isolating, though. I work from home." "I bet," he said, moving to my right side. "I don't think I could do that. I'd go crazy not talking to people all day." He smiled at his own reflection. "I guess I'm the opposite. This job is as much about talking as it is about cutting hair," and he was a natural at it. He had this way of asking questions that made you want to answer, a genuine curiosity that put me at ease. We fell into a surprisingly easy conversation. I learned that he had moved here about a year ago from a smaller town upstate. He had originally planned on going to art school for sculpture, but couldn't afford it, so he went to barber school instead. "It's not that different, he explained, his voice animated with passion. "It's still about form, and lines, and creating something with your hands. You just have a much more talkative block of clay to work with." He grinned, and I found myself grinning back. The image of him as a sculptor resonated with me. It fit perfectly with the way he worked, the intense focus, the artistic flair. It was a piece of him that I never would have guessed, a layer of depth beneath the confident, tattooed exterior. My initial perception of him was being dismantled, piece by piece, and replaced with something far more interesting, far more real. He wasn't just the hot barber from the cool new shop. He was Caleb, the artist who saw sculpture in a haircut. As he worked, there were these small, fleeting moments of contact that my brain cataloged with obsessive detail. The way his forearm brushed against my shoulder as he reached for a different comb. The way he gently tilted my head forward, his fingers resting for a moment at the base of my neck. Each touch was professional, necessary for the job, but my lonely, touch-starved system registered each one like a tiny electric shock. I was acutely aware of his proximity, of the subtle scent of his cologne mixing with the smells of the shop. Then came a moment that was different. He had finished with the scissors and had picked up the clippers to clean up the edges around my ears and the nape of my neck. He placed a hand gently on my shoulder to steady me. "Just hold still for me for a sec," he said, his voice a little lower now that he was standing so close. The buzz of the clippers was a low hum right next to my ear. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. When he was finished, he didn't move away immediately. He brushed the loose hairs from my neck with a soft brush, and then, with the side of his hand, he swept a few stray clippings from my cheek. His fingers were warm against my skin, and the touch lingered for a second longer than was strictly necessary. Or maybe I imagined it. I was probably imagining it, right? It was a simple, thoughtful gesture, the kind a good barber makes. But it sent my heart rate skyrocketing. It was a small thing, a tiny detail in the grand scheme of the haircut, but it felt significant. It felt like the air between us had shifted, become charged with a new kind of awareness. When he finally stepped back to assess his work, our eyes met in the mirror again. This time, there was a different quality to his gaze. It was searching, maybe a little hesitant. A small, almost imperceptible smile played on his lips before he turned away to put the clippers back in their holder. The rest of the haircut passed in a blur. He put some product in my hair, showed me how to style it, and with a final flourish, he whisked the cape away. "What do you think?" he asked, a note of genuine pride in his voice. I looked in the mirror, really looked this time. And I was stunned. My hair looked incredible. It was the best haircut I had ever had. It was still me, but a better, more put-together version of me. He hadn't just cut my hair. He had seen something in the mess and brought it to life. "It's perfect," I said, and I meant it. "Seriously, thank you. It's amazing." A real, wide smile broke across his face then, and it lit up his entire expression. "Good. I'm glad you like it, Miles." He said my name like it was something he enjoyed saying. I paid at the front, adding a much larger tip than I normally would. As I was about to leave, I turned back. "I'll, see you next time," I said, trying to sound casual. Caleb was already cleaning his station for the next client, but he looked up and that warm smile was back. "Looking forward to it," he said. And I walked out of Forge and Shears feeling like I was floating, my mind replaying every single word, every single touch, every single glance. I had gone in for a haircut, but I had walked out with a dangerous, burgeoning seed of hope. Now we get to the part of the story that still makes my stomach clench and my palms sweat a little when I think about it. It was the part that changed everything. The moment that took all my quiet speculation and internal debate and threw it into sharp, undeniable relief. It was the turning point. But let me set the scene first. My fantastic haircut had earned me more than a few compliments at the work retreat. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of confidence, a sense of being seen. And it was all because of Caleb. Naturally, my hair continued to grow, and about a month later, it was time for another cut. The anxiety I felt the first time was gone, replaced by a nervous, thrilling anticipation. This time, I didn't hesitate outside the door. I walked in, and when the bell chimed, Caleb looked up from where he was sweeping. A genuine smile spread across his face when he saw me. "Hey, Miles. Back already?" he said, as if greeting an old friend. My heart did a little leap. He remembered me. I was in his chair again. The black cape settled over me like a familiar blanket. The conversation picked up right where we had left off last time. He asked me about the retreat, and I told him it went better than I expected. I asked him about his sculpting, and he told me he had started a new piece, a bust of his old dog. We talked about movies, about the ridiculously high price of rent, about the best place to get coffee in the neighborhood. It was even easier than the first time, more comfortable. The professional boundary between barber and client felt thinner, more permeable. He was just as focused, just as artistic as before. I watched his reflection in the mirror, mesmerized again by the way he moved. I was more attuned this time to the little moments of contact, his hand on my shoulder, his arm brushing mine. I was searching for them, cataloging them, trying to assign meaning where there was probably none. I was telling myself to be realistic, to not read into his kindness and professional charm. But it was difficult when he looked at me in the mirror with those warm, hazel eyes. After he had finished with the clippers and scissors, he moved on to the final details. I have a bit of a light beard, more of a permanent 5 o'clock shadow than anything, and I always ask for the edges to be cleaned up. He lathered my cheeks and neck with warm shaving cream that smelled of sandalwood. He took out a straight razor, the kind you only see in old movies, and stropped it expertly on a leather strap. There was something incredibly intimate about the act, about sitting there, completely still, while another person held a sharp blade to your throat. It required an immense amount of trust. He carefully, skillfully, shaved the edges of my beard along my jawline and neck, his touch feather-light. His focus was absolute. He was leaning in close, and I could feel the warmth of his body and hear the soft sound of his breathing. The air in my little bubble of the world felt thick and heavy. My own breathing was shallow. I was trying my best to appear calm, to look like a normal person getting a normal shave. Inside, my nervous system was screaming. And then it happened. He moved to trim the area around my mouth, the part that always made me the most nervous. He was using a smaller, more precise tool now, not the straight razor. He leaned in even closer, his face just inches from mine. His free hand came up, not to my shoulder or the back of my head, but to my face. He gently cupped my chin. Just, hold still for me, okay? He murmured, his voice low and a little rough. His thumb came up and rested on my lower lip. It was just for a moment, a gesture to steady my face for the detailed work. But then, instead of holding it there, he traced the curve of my lip with the pad of his thumb, a slow, deliberate motion from one corner to the other. It was the softest touch I had ever felt. It wasn't professional. It wasn't accidental. It was intentional. The world seemed to stop. The background noise of the shop faded away to a dull roar. All I could feel was the warmth and slight roughness of his thumb against my lip. All I could see was the intense, unreadable expression in his eyes, which were locked on my mouth. He said, "Hold still," but then he was the one who didn't. He just held his thumb there for a beat longer than any professional interaction could ever justify. It was probably only 2 seconds, maybe 3, but it stretched into an eternity. In those few seconds, 1,000 silent questions and answers passed between us. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I was sure he could feel the vibration through his hand. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. I just stared up at him, my eyes wide, waiting for what would happen next. Then, as if snapping out of a trance, he blinked. He pulled his hand away quickly, a faint flush creeping up his neck. He cleared his throat and finished trimming around my mouth with hands that were maybe, just maybe, a little less steady than before. He didn't say another word. He just worked, his movements suddenly clipped and overly efficient. The easy, comfortable atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by a thick, vibrating tension. He finished the haircut in silence. When he spun the chair around for the final reveal, he didn't meet my eyes in the mirror. He just busied himself with cleaning his tools, his back mostly to me. "Looks good," he said, his voice strained. I mumbled a thanks and practically fled from the chair. I paid at the counter in a daze, my hand trembling slightly as I signed the receipt. I didn't dare look in his direction. I just walked out the door, the little bell chiming my retreat, my lower lip still tingling from the ghost of his touch. The cool afternoon air hit my face, and I finally took a deep, shaky breath. What in the world had just happened? The walk home was a blur. My brain, which was usually so good at logic and order, felt like a scrambled mess of code. I replayed the moment over and over again. The low murmur of his voice, the command to hold still, the deliberate, impossibly soft trace of his thumb across my lip. There was no way I had misinterpreted that. It was too specific, too intimate. It was a gesture that belonged in a quiet bedroom, not in a brightly lit barbershop in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. I got back to my apartment and immediately went to the bathroom mirror, as if my reflection held the answers. I looked the same. My hair was perfect, of course, but my eyes were wide, and there was a frantic, hopeful, terrified energy buzzing just beneath my skin. I touched my own lip, trying to recreate the feeling, but it was a pale imitation. It was the context, the unexpectedness, the sheer audacity of it that had made it so powerful. For the rest of that day and all of the next, I was useless. I couldn't work. I'd open a file, stare at the lines of code, and my mind would just drift back to the barbershop. I analyzed the moment from every conceivable angle. Possibility 1, it was a complete accident. A slip of the thumb. But that didn't feel right. The movement was too slow, too deliberate. It felt like a question being asked without words. Possibility 2, he was just a very tactile, friendly person. Maybe he did that with all his clients. Maybe it was just part of his charming, cool barber persona. This thought made my stomach sink. The idea that a moment that felt so singular and profound to me could be just a routine gesture for him was devastating. It made me feel naive and foolish. But again, it didn't quite fit. The awkwardness that followed, the sudden silence, his refusal to meet my eye, that wasn't the behavior of a man who was just being friendly. That was the behavior of a man who had crossed a line and knew it. That left possibility 3, the one my heart desperately wanted to be true, but my anxious brain refused to accept. The possibility that he felt something, too. That the connection I felt, the easy conversation, the charged glances in the mirror, that it wasn't all in my head. That his touch was a test, a signal, a way of reaching out across the professional divide to see if I would pull away. And I hadn't. I had frozen, completely captivated. This internal debate raged for days. I was a wreck of hope and fear. 1 minute, I'd be soaring with the belief that this incredible, kind, artistic man might actually be interested in me. I'd imagine going back to the shop, talking to him, the two of us finally acknowledging what had happened. I'd picture us getting coffee, walking in the park, all the simple, normal things I'd wanted for so long. But then, the fear would crash back in. Fear of rejection. Fear of humiliation. What if I had imagined it all? What if I went back and he acted like nothing happened? Or worse, what if he was cold and distant, trying to re-establish a boundary I had fantasized was blurring? The thought of sitting in that chair again, under the weight of that suffocating awkwardness, was almost too much to bear. I would have made a complete fool of myself, misreading professional kindness for romantic interest. It was a classic mistake, right? I started actively avoiding that side of the street. When I had to go out, I'd take the long way around, just so I wouldn't have to walk past the big glass window of Forge and Shears. I was afraid of seeing him, afraid of the answers his expression might hold. It was easier to live in the uncertainty, in the torment of the unknown, than to face a potentially crushing reality. But here's the thing about a seed of hope. Once it's planted, it's almost impossible to ignore. It grows roots. It pushes its way through the dirt and doubt. That single, fleeting touch had awakened a part of me that had been dormant for a very long time. It was a part of me that longed for connection, for intimacy, for something more than the quiet, solitary life I had built for myself. And after a week of this agonizing back and forth, I realized that the pain of not knowing was becoming worse than the potential pain of rejection. I couldn't live in this limbo, replaying a 3-second moment for the rest of my life. I had to know. Even if the answer was no, even if it meant I could never go back to that barber shop again, I had to have an answer. I needed closure, one way or another. So, one Friday evening, after a full day of staring at my screen and getting nothing done, I made a decision. I stood up, put on my jacket, and walked out the door. I didn't need a haircut. My hair was still perfect, but I was going back to Forge and Shears. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs as I walked the 2 blocks to the barber shop. It was near closing time, and the open sign was still illuminated, casting a warm glow onto the damp sidewalk. I could see through the window that the shop was empty except for Caleb, who was sweeping up hair from the floor, just as I'd seen him do so many times from my window. This was it. There would be no other customers, no other barbers to act as a buffer. It would just be us. I pushed the door open, the bell chiming softly. Caleb looked up, and his sweeping stopped mid-stroke. The friendly, welcoming smile I had seen before was gone. In its place was an expression of pure, unadulterated surprise, mingled with something else, something I couldn't quite read. Was it panic? Relief? He leaned the broom against the station. Miles, he said, his voice quiet. Hey, did you forget something last time? No, I said, my own voice shaking slightly. I took a few steps inside and let the door swing shut behind me. No, I needed to talk to you. The air was thick with all the things we hadn't said last time. He just nodded slowly, his eyes searching mine. He gestured vaguely to one of the empty barber chairs. Okay, he said. Talk. I didn't sit down. I just stood there in the middle of the shop, my hands shoved deep into my pockets. Look, I'm probably making a huge fool of myself right now. I began, the words I had rehearsed 100 times suddenly feeling clumsy and inadequate. And if I totally misread everything, please just tell me, and I will leave and never bother you again. But last week, when you were finishing my haircut, I trailed off, my throat suddenly dry. Caleb's expression softened. He knew exactly what I was talking about. He took a step closer. The shave, he finished for me, his voice barely a whisper. I nodded, unable to speak. I just looked at him, trying to convey all of my hope and all of my fear in a single glance. He let out a long, slow breath, running a hand through his own perfectly styled hair and messing it up. It was the first time I had ever seen him look anything less than completely put together. He looked nervous. He looked vulnerable. I am so sorry, he said, and my heart plummeted into my stomach. This was it. The rejection. It was just a mistake. He saw the look on my face and quickly added, No, not for that. I'm sorry for how weird I was afterward. For making you feel, I don't know, confused. He took another step, closing the distance between us until we were only a few feet apart. Here's the thing, Miles. That it wasn't an accident. I knew exactly what I was doing. The breath I had been holding escaped me in a rush. He wasn't denying it. I've never done that before, he continued, his gaze dropping to the floor for a second before meeting mine again. With a client. It was completely unprofessional. But from the first time you walked in here, I don't know. There was something about you. You were so quiet and nervous, but when we started talking, it was just so easy. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I kept telling myself to keep it professional, to just be your barber. But then you were sitting there, in my chair, and you were trusting me, and I just got lost in the moment. I crossed a line, and I've been kicking myself for it all week, thinking I completely freaked you out and that I'd never see you again. A small, self-deprecating smile touched his lips, which I guess I was right about, until now. I felt a smile, a real, shaky, relieved smile, spread across my own face. You didn't freak me out, I said, my voice finally steady. Or, well, you did, but in a good way. I've been thinking about it all week, too. Now it was my turn to feel the heat rise in my cheeks. I thought I imagined it, or that I had made it all up in my head. You didn't, he said, his voice firm and certain. He closed the remaining space between us. He was so close now I could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. He smelled like sandalwood and cedar, the scent I now associated with hope. I like you, Miles. I have since that first day. I just had no idea how to tell you. And I ended up doing it in possibly the weirdest, most unprofessional way imaginable. I thought it was kind of perfect, I confessed. He let out a soft laugh, a sound of pure relief. And then, he did something that my daydreams hadn't even been bold enough to conjure. He reached out, his hand gentle, and cupped my cheek, right where his hand had brushed away the stray hairs before. His thumb came up, and once again, he traced the line of my lower lip. This time, there was no hesitation, no professional pretense. It was a clear, unmistakable question. And this time, I had an answer. I leaned in, closing the last inch between us, and kissed him. It wasn't a hesitant, questioning kiss. It was a kiss of mutual relief, of shared confession. It was soft and sure and tasted faintly of the mint from the gum he was chewing. His other hand came up to my waist, pulling me closer. It felt like coming home to a place I had never been before. When we finally broke apart, we just rested our foreheads together, both of us breathing a little heavily. So, he said, a wide, happy grin spreading across his face. Does this mean I can still be your barber? I laughed, the sound echoing in the quiet, empty shop. I think we can probably work something out, I replied. But maybe next time, We could, get a coffee first? Caleb's grin widened. I would love that, Miles. I would love that more than you know. That was a few months ago. It's funny to look back now on the person I was, the quiet, anxious man who was terrified of getting a haircut. My world isn't so small anymore. It's been filled with the sound of Caleb's laughter, the sight of his ridiculously handsome smile, and the comfortable, easy rhythm of our life together. We did get that coffee, which turned into dinner, which turned into a whole weekend spent talking and getting to know every corner of each other's minds. I learned that his confidence was a carefully constructed shield for a deep-seated insecurity about his art. And he learned that my quietness wasn't aloofness, but a preference for listening and observation. We fit together in a way I never thought possible, my quiet calm balancing his vibrant energy. He still cuts my hair, of course, but now he does it in my apartment, usually on a lazy Sunday morning. The whole process is much more intimate, filled with stolen kisses and easy conversation without the audience of a busy shop. Sometimes, when he's leaning in close, concentrating on getting a line just right, he'll pause. He'll cup my chin in his hand, his thumb finding its way to my lip, and he'll trace that same line he did on that first day. It's our little signal, a private callback to the moment everything changed. And every time he does it, I feel that same jolt, that same sense of wonder that this incredible man is here with me. I never expected that walking into a barber shop would lead me here, to a life that feels so full and bright. It taught me that sometimes, the things we fear the most, a new situation, a conversation with a stranger, the possibility of rejection, are just doorways to the things we want the most. You just have to be brave enough to push the door open and see what's on the other side. That's how life works sometimes, isn't it? The most extraordinary things can begin with the most ordinary of moments. For me, it all began with a simple haircut and a touch that told me everything I needed to know.